You're listening to episode 37 of The Secular Buddhist. Welcome to The Secular Buddhist. I'm Ted Meissner. The Secular Buddhist is the podcast and website for modern, secular application of early Buddhist thought. The podcast has interviews and roundtable discussions pertaining to engaged Buddhist training and practice, and the companion website has show notes for each episode, along with resource materials on Buddhism, critical thinking, science, secularism, and skeptical thought. Though the podcast focuses on core practice from a secular viewpoint, more traditional teachings are welcome and openly discussed. Dr. Pam Gay speaks with us today about comics, science fiction conventions, new discoveries with the Hubble telescope, and practicing acceptance of others' spiritual views. Hi everyone, and welcome back to The Secular Buddhist. I'd like to take a moment before we get started with today's wonderful guest to thank you for listening. We've had some very insightful commentary on the Facebook fan page. People have been making good suggestions about guests they'd like to hear interviewed, and have taken the time to share their stories with me by clicking on Contact on the website. I've said it before, and here it is again. This is for you, about you and your experience. It's not Dhamma talks from an authority figure. It's about people's direct experience and involvement in this teaching. And some of you have written in to say how you've gotten something positive out of the podcast. For that, I'm very, very happy. If you're finding the podcast to be of value, I'd ask you to take a few minutes. Go ahead, you can do it now. I'll still be here when you're done. And rate the podcast on iTunes. Make a comment about it. It will help raise the awareness of the podcast and let others know that they're not alone in wanting to pursue a spiritual practice that's best suited to them. Also, recommend the Facebook fan page for the Secular Buddhist podcast to others who may find it helpful. We're always glad to see more faces. As we talk about this growing of our secular community, we often encounter questioning, resistance, and sometimes antagonism from others, even other Buddhists. How do we deal with those interactions? We've seen in recent politics that reaching a hand across the aisle isn't always effective. And as we heard in our interview with Doug McGill on Right Speech a few episodes ago, sometimes our best intentions may not come out right when put into words. The good news is that we're not alone in this striving to be understood and accepted. There are devoutly spiritual people of other faiths who are just as skeptical as we are, and are just as eager to be open and honest in rational communication. Today, we're truly fortunate to have as our guest someone I'm delighted to call friend, Dr. Pam Gay. Pam is an astronomer, writer, and podcaster focused on using new media to engage people in science and technology. She works to communicate astronomy to the public through her blog, frequent public talks, and through popular articles. Her writing has appeared in Astronomy and Sky and Telescope magazines. So, sit back, relax, and have a nice pan-galactic gargle blaster. Yes, it's a drink. You can check for yourself. And I'm here with Dr. Pam Gay. Pam, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you for having me on your show, Ted.
It's always nice to hear your voice, and I will tell the audience that I've been a listener of Pam's wonderful voice on various podcasts for over a year now, and it's always been terrific because the way she describes things is always very insightful and enthusiastic, and it drives passion in what she talks about, and that's part of what we're going to talk about here. So, Pam, I'm going to cut immediately to the last time I saw you, which was at Dragon Con.
Yes.
In Atlanta. And we don't have our video on, but I'm holding up in front of the computer my copy of Hani and the Mystery of the Vorwerp.
Yes.
And perhaps you could explain that to the audience as to the story of what it is I'm talking about and why it sounds like paper.
Well, it all starts back in August of 2007. There's this online citizen science project, which I'm proud to now be a part of, but at the time I was simply a reporter reporting on, called Galaxy Zoo. And this is a project that asks everyday people all around the world to look at images of galaxies and click buttons to tell the computer what it is they see, because software isn't yet able to classify galaxies and sort out with 100% accuracy if it's a spiral or an elliptical or some weird funky shape created by two things hitting at high velocities. And the other thing computers can't do is they can't say there's this weird green thing over in the corner. And that's where Hani comes in. Hani Van Arkel is a school teacher, a guitar player, a fan of Brian May, who luckily is a fan of Galaxy Zoo and blogged that everyone should go use Galaxy Zoo. And Hani did what Brian May said, and she was using Galaxy Zoo, and one day she saw this blob of gas that looked kind of like a dancing Kermit the Frog, and she asked, what is it? And that question led to a fairly major scientific discovery, and I'm not going to give away the details because the details are all in the comic book. And we're selling them at cost through the website hannisvorwerp.zooniverse.org, and anyone who wants to can order their own copy and read Hani's story.
And I gotta say, it was a great story, not just in reading the comic, but being there for the premiere, where these are first released, in that Hani was there with us, kind of, over Skype, on a giant screen, and we had ice cream made with, what, liquid nitrogen, was it?
Liquid nitrogen, yeah.
Nitrogen ice cream. Oh, and I hadn't had that before. It was actually very good. And the neat thing about this was you also had the comic artists and the colorists with us at this release. And it was always it was a good time had by all. So I would encourage people to take a look at this, because what was done here, Pam, and I think this was an idea that you were part of creating, is that there was some budget money to communicate some of the wonders of astronomy. And
right.
There was the wonderful idea of, let's have a comic book to tell this story. And I thought it was just a wonderful, different way, a different venue to communicate that hasn't been used for this kind of thing before.
And what was awesome about this was, yes, it was just an add-on to our science grant. We were given time on the Hubble Space Telescope, and when you get time on the Hubble Space Telescope, they want to make sure you have the resources needed to do your science. So you get a certain amount of financial help to do your research. And there's the opportunity to also go and ask for an extra few $1,000 to $10,000, a little bit more if you get lucky, to communicate what you're finding to the public. And we asked for enough money to hire 2 students to do all of the color and all of the illustration, and to then have a community of people work together to write this. So this is a project that involved the public, that involved students, and then we got to release all of it at DragonCon, and who can complain about that?
And that was a blast. And we had Elea Brash and Chris Spangler.
Yes.
Line art and colorist for that. And it was very interesting, because I know, looking at their art and speaking with them after the release, they seem to be fans and fit right in with the rest of the DragonCon crowd.
Totally. They're just 2 students that got their nerd on, I guess.
They did, yeah. And what a great place to do it, at DragonCon. So you're also the executive director of Astrosphere New Media Association. Tell us more about that.
So this is the brainchild of myself, of Phil Plait, of Fraser Kane, of many of us who wanted to provide a nonprofit that could help produce new media for astronomy communications and skeptical thought as well. We do science, mostly we do astronomy. We do science and we do skepticism. And we do it all online, where we can use all sorts of different technologies to do simulations, to do demonstrations, and to engage people in a two-way dialogue. So Astrosphere New Media is responsible for, first and foremost, rescuing several of the International Year of Astronomy projects that needed a home. So 365 Days of Astronomy podcast, the Astronomy 2009 Island and Second Life. They also partially produce Astronomy Cast, which is a joint production of Astrosphere, of my home university, SIUE, and of Universe Today, where Fraser's located. And then there's a number of other side projects. We host the Galileoscope website. We're working with We Are Astronomers to create a place where you could go and learn about people who do astronomy. It's a bunch of different projects that hopefully will get people engaged in science and scientists.
Mm-hmm. And that's one of the things that you and I have chatted about many times, and we have been at panel discussions where the talk has been about how we engage with youth and how we get the interest there and how we get the passion there and how we get the training, because science as is suffering a bit in our schools lately.
Yeah.
And what this is trying to do, and your efforts are turning that around to make science fun. And I think we've taken great strides in doing that. We have a long way to go.
Well, it's one of the sad truths is the fastest way to get someone to dislike astronomy in many, but thank God not all cases, is to have someone take Astronomy 101. There's something about formal education that in many ways turns people off to learning. And if we can engage them through other ways, sneak up on them with science content, hopefully we can prevent them from getting turned off through the process of exams and homework and the rigors of equations.
I got a comic and darn it, I learned something. Oh.
You know, accidental learning can be the best kind.
Yeah, you suddenly realize, oh wait, that's neat. It's not quite what I thought.
Right, exactly.
And now, something that we've also, one of the other places we had run into each other was at TAM, the amazing meeting, recently, and one of my highlights of this year's TAM was Phil Plait, the Bad Astronomer, your co-founder of Astrosphere New Media Association. He gave a speech there, and it generated a lot of discussion on the internet about what was said, and I'm very glad that Phil said what he said, and really the discussion centered around, and Pam, keep me honest on this, you may have a different take or a broader view of it than I do, that the main point here was that we, in trying to engage with people who may have different views than our own, or even those who have the same views as our own in most things, but maybe a few different ones, we want to engage in a fashion that's going to encourage the dialogue and not shut it down and make people more firmly entrenched.
Right.
In something we may disagree with. And I was wondering if you could talk for just a minute about that view. I've chatted about it enough on this podcast. I think people would rather hear someone else talk about it for a minute.
Well, it's the problem that it's much easier to tell someone, no, you're an idiot, you're wrong, and storm off, than say, I respect you, let's have a conversation where I explain my viewpoint and you explain your viewpoint, and we try and find the truth. And there's a lot of places where when we engage with people, it's easy to have that let's look at this logically conversation. If you're talking about vaccines, most people you can engage them in, well, here's the actual proof. This is just propaganda over here. And they'll change their minds and they'll go get vaccinated. But there's other places where you're shaking people's core beliefs, and you may actually be wandering into the realm of opinion. And so when you use one of Phil's favorite examples, pick on people who believe they've been abducted by aliens. These are people who, in many cases, have some sort of a psychological break somewhere in their psyche, and they're already fragile. And if you simply pound on them saying you're an idiot, how can you believe you're abducted by aliens? Don't you see how stupid that is? you're attacking them as a person, first of all, not attacking the idea. You are not basing what you're saying on facts, you're basing it on emotion and the opinion that they're an idiot. And all you're going to do is cause them to not want to be near you. And someone who doesn't want to be near you, they're not going to listen to you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and one of the points Phil made was, what's the goal?
Yeah.
What do you want to have happen? And I think that gets missed a great deal in these kinds of interactions that we have, where we have, say, evidence on our side, as an example, mm-hmm. and the other side has a deeply cherished belief, which may or may not be so. It may be something utterly untestable.
Right.
And that's okay. It doesn't mean we have to convince them to believe a different way. And I was at a seminar for about a week on Buddhist ethics, and one of the people had said, you should always, in entering conversations like this where there's a disagreement, you should treat the other person as if they're right. And everyone there said, about 30 people in there, oh, yes, 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 oh, yes, yes, yes. And I raised my hand and said, I disagree. Which made me the heretic immediately. And I said, well, there's something I want you to consider about that. If you approach it that way, with the attitude, I'm going to listen to you as if you're right, you're automatically starting with the absolute firm conviction that they're wrong and you're right. It's as if, and there's you're not genuinely listening. And I think this comes up in a number of cases where people have, say, spiritual experiences, or they feel they've been abducted or something like that, where we're not lending credence to your experience was harrowing or wonderful or whatever it is. That we can't touch that. That's a personal experience, and we need to understand that they are absolutely correct. They had something happen. Now, we may disagree with the conclusions about what that was, and that's okay, and we can have that kind of dialogue. But approaching it from as you were saying, and as Phil said in his speech, nobody changed their mind by someone screaming at their face.
Right. And right now we unfortunately are in a place culturally where we're very fractured. This is coming up politically with the Tea Party. It's coming up religiously with Dawkins versus pretty much the entire Christian world.
The Christian world,
and all of these different factions seem in many ways to be based on hate. Mm-hmm. And all that does is cause us to click ourselves off into only talking to people who are like ourselves. And that's a very ugly place to be, and it's leading to a dialogue of hate as well. And this world I don't want to live in a world where a dialogue of hate is what dominates the conversation.
Yeah. Yeah, I think about people folks who are listening to the podcast, and Pam, yourself can probably pick some folks. I think we all can, that we know, say, a couple that got together many years ago, and they're together all the time, and that's great. I can't imagine wanting to be with someone 24/7. That might be a bit much, but that's good for them, and okay. But I've noticed in some of the couples that I know like that, their views, whatever they may be, in whichever direction they lean, tend to go more radically in that direction because they become more insular, as you're describing with individual groups, particularly as couples that don't spend a lot of social time outside of each other and their kids and their immediate family. It seems to happen even more, and there's not enough. I think where we need to change that is to make a point of reaching out outside of our comfort zone, outside of our preaching to the choir, and to hear other views, and to find where we do have those commonalities, and to have those dialogues.
And it's through conversations that start not from a point of treating the person as though they were right. That can lead to hurt. But instead, starting from a position of, you are another human being. I could be wrong, but I'm going to start with the belief that you deserve respect.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And starting from that position of respect and trying to understand not what the other person believes in terms of, I believe it too, but how it is they got to that point.
Right.
Is an important journey.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and for us in something that has been said a few times is in Buddhist circles is it's not doing the right thing just because it's the right thing. It's doing the right thing so that you further understand why it's the right thing. And in this kind of conversation where we're engaging with people with whom we have those differences, that's where we need to understand that they're not wrong at all. They're absolutely right within the context of who they are and their framework and where they're coming from. And it may be that factually there are differences. There may be ideological differences. That's okay. We're always going to have those. But I would challenge all of us to question our own automatic sense of our correctness in whatever it is.
And if we do want to change someone's framework, change them so that they do vaccinate their children, change them so that they do better protect the environment in so many different ways that will hopefully lead to an overall better civilization. If we want to change their framework, we have to understand how they're built first. You can't just randomly start pulling out support beams. You end up breaking people that way.
Right. And this has come up in particularly the past couple of weeks in the Buddhist realm. There's been a lot of discussion about rebirth, because there are folks who are very devoutly religious who are firm adherents in the belief of rebirth, and there are folks like myself and a few other people who are, I'm an atheist with that regard. I don't believe it. If I see actual evidence, of course, I will change my mind. And that's been very divisive, especially the past few weeks. And one of the reasons I wanted to have you on the podcast is I know that you and I have chatted about this. It's an experience that you've shared that you're a scientist. You're a hard scientist. There's no soft science about this. This is hard science.
I am an astrophysicist. Yes,
an astrophysicist. It doesn't get much more big word than that. And you got letters after name and everything. And at the same time, you're also a skeptic. You want to see evidence, and based on evidence, draw conclusions. And I know areas that have been challenging for you, as it has been for me in the skeptic community, is that you also have a spiritual practice.
Yeah.
And that can be somewhat challenging, as we find ourselves often on the defensive trying to explain why we can have that and how we can have that. So I wanted to ask you, what are some of the things that you have found helpful in explaining, yes, I have a spiritual belief, and here's what it is, and here's how it works for me, and why it's okay for me to be a skeptic and still have this. How do you approach that?
Well, I have to start with no, I don't have any tangible, can test it, touch it, repeat it way of saying, yes, there is a God. I also don't have any taste it, touch it, test it ways of saying there isn't a God. So scientifically, I have no proof either way. So in the lack of evidence, you have nothing more than,
a lack of evidence.
Yeah. And logically, that lands me on, if I was a purely logical person, agnosticism. And I know that there's a lot of people out there that would disagree with me and say that in the land of neither positive nor negative evidence, I should not believe in God. I don't agree with that statement. But as a human being, I have opinions, I have emotions, I have feelings, and there's so many things that seem so finely tuned, so many times in history and in my own life that things have turned out with 10 million monkeys typing Shakespeare when there's only one monkey in the room. Those statistical anomalies where one person's life doesn't fit what should happen. I look at all of these different things, and to me it adds up to there is room in this universe for a God. And I've chosen to believe in a God, and I've chosen to believe in a Christian God. And I admit that as a scientist, this has made me a pariah to many Christians, because how can I believe in evolution? How can I believe in Big Bang? And it's also put me in a very difficult position with the skeptics community, where I got the most heartbreaking message the other day. Someone who'd been reading all of the comments on my blog, which aren't all kind with regards to my belief system, wrote that the reason we feel so strongly about this is it feels like we believed in the tooth fairy, and the tooth fairy was taken away from us because they saw me as a scientist, they saw me as a leader, and the second they realized that I had theist beliefs, it was heartbreaking to them. And I get that. I've in the past dated people who weren't Christians, and listening to their belief that life is nothing more than random chemical reactions that have no meaning, I found that equally heartbreaking.
Yeah, yeah. And it is, it's a challenging thing, because as you said, and I think this is a key point, is that if we could convince people just with facts, if we were strictly only logical creatures and that was it for us, then perhaps we'd all think in a very similar fashion. But we're not. We do have emotional responses. We do have very visceral, tangible feelings about something. And what we're talking about here is that it's okay to respect those, that those are, it's fine to, you're not being an accommodationist to say, you have a deep-seated feeling, doing a spiritual practice that you have chosen or were born to makes you feel good and is the right thing for you. That's great. And in secular Buddhism, one of the things I want to make sure people understand is that we're not out to destroy Buddhism in the traditional sense. That's not what it's about at all. But that there are many of us who, for whatever reason, may feel differently. And this is opening up an avenue to still having a deep spiritual practice that still allows you to be a skeptic, to be a scientist, and still be a vibrant, engaged, passionate, living, breathing, emotional human being.
Yes.
That's okay. And there's not a problem with that.
And for me, the distinct separation comes in, where is there evidence? Mm-hmm. When I look at a lot of what we refer to as woo ideas, the things that cause you to go, woo, woo, wow, that's insane. When I look at these ideas of Bigfoot and alien abductions and paranormal this, that, and the other thing, and I ask, where is the evidence?
As Swoopy would say with Bigfoot, where's the poop?
Right, there's exactly. No poop. And there's some things where in science we say, well, we have lower limits. We know that within these limits, these critters don't exist. And I feel confident saying, as far as we've been scientifically able to prove, there are no ghosts. Someday someone may prove me wrong, but I doubt it. But I have that evidence to point to of null result after null result after null result. But when you start dealing with things that go beyond your ability to test or not test, that's where, unfortunately, the heart takes over.
Right. And it's where where we keep getting into a mix-up, certainly have recently in Buddhist circles, is that we have the natural world. Things which are testable hypotheses, things we can say, well, if this is true, then we can measure it this way. And that's the realm of science and naturalism and critical thinking. That all works just fine. But there are things that we're saying right away, scientifically, this is off the table. I'm okay with things being scientifically off the table that are an emotional response, and it's all right that I may know that evolution has led me to a point of having emotions as survival, et cetera, et cetera. That's okay. I still have them. To deny that these are important to me and meaningful to me is not so. And to tell someone they're wrong for having them is also not a valid way to engage and to build bridges.
And this is where respect comes in, because it's all right for me to say to you, I have complete respect for you. I've come to a different place than you have. You're an atheist and I'm a Christian. And one of us is right and one of us is wrong, and I can't prove which is which.
Yeah, and that's okay.
Yeah. And it will sometimes break your hearts to find out that someone you love has a different belief system, because that is a point of contention. But there's people who get emotionally tied up in whether you're a Red Sox fan or a Yankees fan, and I think God is much more important to argue about. But it's that same, damn it, why can't you believe what I believe, but I love you anyways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you're hitting it right on the head there, is that in our engagements with people of different faiths, different belief systems, different ideologies, different ideas about Bigfoot abductions or stress reduction or meditation or
right.
God is there, whatever it is,
yeah.
to engage with them in a way that is a positive thing, to allow that to continue, because as you mentioned, we are a very fractured culture right now in particular, that as we become more global and less regional, we're really like tectonic plates. We're rubbing up against things we normally wouldn't rub up against. And we're challenged with that right now, because it's, as an interview I just did with Doug McGill and put out about right speech, that he's a journalist and is frequently challenged with writing in a way that is not harmful.
Yeah.
And we have that problem in the words we use. And I've been very happy that the folks on the secular side and on the rebirth side, on that engagement, have been, I think, fairly respectable in their words. And there have been some things that have rubbed people the wrong way, but I don't think they have been done with malice of forethought. And I've been very proud of my community in that people have been good. And I just encourage us to keep having that dialogue. And Pam, I wanted to ask you, what do you have coming up? What's some new stuff? I know you've got Astronomy Cast and 365 Days of Astronomy. What project are you working on right now that you can share with us?
I think the biggest one sitting on my plate right now is we're getting ready to, in the hopefully not too distant future, relaunch the Galaxy Zoo website with a brand new set of Hubble images.
Excellent.
And some of these images, you're going to be one of the first people looking at these things with your eyes. And alongside all of these science images that we're asking for people to help us classify is going to be a whole host of brand new educational materials that you can explore to better learn about this crazy and amazing universe that we live in and that we have the scientific ability to understand.
Awesome. Dr. Pamela L. Gay, the Executive Director of Astrosphere New Media Association. Website address is www.astrosphere.org. Pam, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like to learn more about something you've heard in today's podcast, please come visit the companion website at www.thesecularbuddhist.com, and you'll find an entire web page devoted to this and every episode. There are also links to discussions about today's topic on the Secular Buddhist Facebook fan page. The music for the Secular Buddhist is used by permission from John Kaizan Neptune's CD, Steps in Time. Additional music is provided courtesy of Monty Levinson of Taihei Shakuhachi and Rodrigo Rodriguez. Their websites are linked on the Secular Buddhist on the About Music page. Until next time, remember, every moment you have a choice. Make it the best you can. See you next time on the Secular Buddhist.